Spoiled son of a millionaire chokes black cleaner's daughter, not knowing she's a boxer. In the heart of Dallas, towering glass skyscrapers stretched toward the sky, monuments to wealth and ambition. At the top of one of these glittering towers sat Adrian Coleman, the only son of a powerful oil tycoon. Born into luxury, Adrian had never known limits. From the day he could walk, every whim was granted, every mistake erased with money, every reckless impulse forgiven because of his family name. Teachers who dared to discipline him were pressured into silence. Friends who questioned him disappeared from his circle, replaced by those who craved proximity to power. By the time he reached his early 20s, Adrian had perfected the role of the untouchable heir. His life revolved around expensive whiskey, nights blurred by cocaine, and the rush of humiliating anyone beneath him. The more reckless he became, the more convinced he was that rules did not apply to him. To Adrian, the world was divided into two groups, those who served and those who ruled. And in his eyes, he was born to rule. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share a word of love in the comments. On the other side of that divide was Rosa Alvarez. For nearly 20 years, Rosa had worked quietly as a janitor in the very tower that bore Adrian's family name. Every night she mopped its endless marble floors, emptied its trash bins, and polished the glass that framed the Dallas skyline. She never complained, never drew attention to herself. Her life was one of routine sacrifice, but it was not meaningless. For Rosa, every long shift and aching back was for her daughter, Elena. Elena was Rosa's pride, her reason for pushing through exhaustion night after night. A first-generation college student, Elena studied with the intensity of someone who knew how much had been given up for her to succeed. She carried not just her own dreams, but the hopes of her mother, who had left behind her own ambitions long ago. To Rosa, Elena was proof that struggle could lead to something brighter, that a life of cleaning other people's messes didn't have to be the only future for her family. But Rosa's hope existed alongside fear. She had seen firsthand how people like Adrian treated workers like her. She knew how fragile her job was, how easily her entire livelihood could be threatened by one complaint, one careless mistake. Every shift was a careful balance. Work quickly, stay invisible, and above all, avoid conflict with the powerful. It was a balance that worked until one night it didn't. On that evening, the building seemed no different than any other. The air was heavy with the smell of polished marble and the faint hum of machines still running in the executive offices above. Rosa moved from floor to floor with her mop and bucket, her body tired but her mind set on finishing her work quickly so she could return home to Elena. To her, this was just another night of cleaning up the remnants of people who lived lives she could only imagine. But Adrian Coleman was in the building too. And unlike Rosa, he wasn't there to work. Drunk from hours of partying and angry at the world for reasons he himself could barely explain, he wandered the executive lounge searching for a new target. That was how his gaze fell on Rosa, an aging cleaner with calloused hands and a humble uniform, someone he believed existed only to serve. To Adrian, she was nothing. But to Rosa, this moment would change everything. The spark that ignited the night's chaos was small, almost trivial. As Rosa moved her mop and bucket across the marble, water splashed, landing on Adrian's expensive Armani shirt. To most, it was nothing more than an accident, something solved with an apology and a towel. But to Adrian, it was an insult, a reminder that even in his kingdom, he could be touched by someone he considered beneath him. His fury ignited instantly, not because of the water, but because Rosa's very existence had disrupted his illusion of control. For Rosa, fear set in immediately. She knew Adrian's reputation, knew the stories whispered among staff about his temper and the way problems around him had a way of disappearing. One wrong move and she could lose her job. One confrontation, and her daughter's future could be pulled out from under them. She apologized quickly, desperately, hoping to de-escalate. But Adrian wasn't interested in apologies. He wanted power. He wanted someone to suffer for daring to inconvenience him. What Rosa didn't know was that Adrian's cruelty wouldn't stop with her. His anger, his sense of entitlement, would soon reach beyond her and into the life of the one person she loved most, her daughter. And what Adrian could never imagine was that the quiet, underestimated young woman he thought he could intimidate was hiding a strength that would expose not only his weakness, but the rot inside the empire he believed would protect him forever. Because sometimes the downfall of the powerful doesn't come from rivals or enemies. Sometimes it begins with a single act of arrogance against someone the world refuses to see. And in Adrian Coleman's case, that arrogance was about to set in motion the unraveling of his entire life. Adrian's Armani shirt clung damply to his chest, the faint splash of mop water turning into a storm inside his head. To anyone else, it was nothing. To him, it was humiliation, an unforgivable insult from someone he deemed invisible. His eyes narrowed, jaw tightening as he loomed over Rosa. The smell of alcohol rolled off him, sharp and bitter, as his rage swelled. Rosa stammered out apologies, bowing her head, her voice trembling. But Adrian wasn't listening. Her fear only fueled his cruelty. With a sneer, he yanked the phone from Rosa's pocket. His fingers flew over the screen, not to call for help, but to set a trap. Rosa's heart pounded as she realized what he was doing, messaging her daughter. Within moments, a text had been sent to Elena. "Come to the executive lounge. I need you here now." Rosa tried to protest, but Adrian's glare silenced her. He wanted an audience, someone more vulnerable, someone to break. Minutes later, the quiet hum of the lounge was pierced by the sound of Elena's footsteps. At 22, Elena carried herself with a quiet strength, unaware of the storm waiting for her. She entered the lounge expecting her mother, only to find Adrian waiting in the shadows. His hand shot out before she could react, his fingers wrapping around her throat. The force slammed her against the cold wall, her breath stolen in an instant. Adrian's voice dripped with venom as he mocked her family's poverty, belittling her mother's work, and sneering at the idea that people like them thought they belonged in the same building as him. His grip tightened, and Rosa, frozen behind the glass doors, could do nothing but watch in horror. Her trembling fingers slammed against the alarm button, knowing security would take time to arrive, knowing her daughter was trapped. But Adrian had miscalculated. He saw Elena as fragile, just another powerless victim. What he didn't see was the years of discipline forged in the underground boxing circuits of Texas. By day, Elena was a student, books in hand, blending into lecture halls. By night, she was a fighter. Her fists hardened from endless hours in dimly lit gyms, her body tuned to endure pain and strike back harder. Just 3 weeks earlier, she had signed a professional deal worth millions. Yet she had kept it hidden, a secret even her mother barely understood. Now, faced with Adrian's drunken violence, Elena's instincts awakened. She didn't panic. She studied him. His stance was sloppy, his balance unsteady. His left arm, the one pressing her against the wall, was tense but exposed. Every mistake he made under the haze of alcohol registered in her mind like flashing signals. Rosa's panic grew, but Elena's eyes burned with a calm intensity. She wasn't just surviving, she was calculating. Then Adrian's phone buzzed in his pocket, the vibration loud in the silence. Annoyed, he glanced down, loosening his grip just slightly. The screen lit up with messages that froze him. Photos of his yacht parties, damning images of drugs, underage drinking, and violence he thought had been buried. More texts followed, evidence of bank transfers, surveillance clips, and audio recordings of threats. Panic flickered in his eyes. This wasn't random. It was deliberate. Behind the scenes, Elena's closest friend, Daniel Cho, had been waiting for this moment. The son of a retired investigator, Daniel had quietly gathered evidence of Adrian's crimes for months. His younger sister, Hannah, had once been one of Adrian's victims, silenced by fear. But Daniel refused to let the cycle continue. Now, with Adrian distracted, Daniel triggered the release of everything they had collected. In real time, the files were being sent to the FBI, state prosecutors, and the media. Adrian's arrogance cracked. His phone buzzed again, this time with alerts from national news outlets, breaking stories of the Coleman scandals splashing across headlines. His father's furious voice rang through a call, screaming that federal agents were raiding their mansion, seizing documents, freezing accounts. Adrian stumbled back, confusion and disbelief etched on his face. For the first time, he wasn't in control. Elena leaned forward, her voice low but steady. She told him his empire was crumbling, that every lie, every crime, every secret was unraveling. The words cut deeper than any fist. His knees buckled, and for a brief moment he wasn't the son of power. He was just a coward exposed. But the danger wasn't over. Rose's heart still raced. The alarm blared through the halls, yet security hadn't arrived. Adrian, desperate and enraged, lunged again, his hand swinging wildly. It was the breaking point. Elena shifted her weight, years of training coursing through her body. She dodged his clumsy strike, her reflexes sharp, her eyes focused. She didn't strike back yet. She didn't need to. She let him stumble, let him feel his own weakness. Every second stretched like an eternity. Rosa pressed her hands against the glass, whispering silent prayers, torn between terror and awe. Her daughter, the girl she once feared was too gentle for the world, stood unflinching before a man who had always believed himself untouchable. The sound of pounding footsteps finally echoed in the distance, building security rushing closer. But Adrian's desperation only grew. He shouted, his words breaking into slurred threats, trying to cling to the power slipping through his fingers. Elena held her ground, eyes locked on him, waiting. The moment before the guards burst through the door was suspended in tension. Adrian's world had already begun to collapse, but he didn't know it yet. His empire, his family's legacy, his carefully crafted illusion of superiority. All of it was unraveling faster than he could grasp. And the very person he thought he could crush was standing there, stronger than he had ever imagined. The real fight hadn't even started. The executive lounge, once a symbol of power and luxury, had transformed into a cage of desperation. The alarm wailed, red lights flashing across the marble walls. Yet inside the room the true storm raged in silence, the clash between arrogance and resilience. Adrian Coleman, drenched in sweat, his pupils wide from liquor and rage, lurched forward again. He was no longer the polished heir of a dynasty. He was an animal cornered, his world collapsing piece by piece. Elena stood her ground. Her chest rose and fell steadily, her fists clenched at her sides. She had faced men larger, stronger, faster than Adrian in underground rings across Texas. But this fight was different. This wasn't about survival for herself. It was about her mother watching from behind the glass, about every woman who had been silenced by men like him, about proving that no amount of money could shield cruelty from justice forever. Adrian swung clumsily, his movements slowed by alcohol and panic. Elena sidestepped with precision, her eyes locked on him. Every ounce of training, every late night spent in hidden gyms, whispered through her muscles. She waited, calculating until his balance faltered. And then, with a single, explosive movement, she struck. Her fist collided with his jaw, the crack echoing through the lounge like a gunshot. Adrian staggered backward, crashing into a table that splintered under his weight. Rosa gasped from behind the glass, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She had never seen her daughter like this, fierce, unbreakable, untouchable. Elena wasn't the fragile student she had feared for. She was La Tormenta, the storm, a fighter forged in silence. But Adrian wasn't finished. Spitting blood, his face twisted in rage, he lunged again. His hands clawed toward Elena's throat, desperate to reclaim the dominance slipping from him. Elena ducked low, twisting his arm with brutal efficiency. Years of grappling and defensive drills poured into the moment. With a sharp pivot, she sent him sprawling face-first onto the marble floor. The sound of shouts grew louder, security rushing closer, but the seconds dragged like hours. Adrian writhed, cursing, spitting threats about his father's power, about how no one would believe her, about how she was nothing but the daughter of a cleaner. Each word dripped with venom, his last weapon. And then his phone vibrated again. Across the floor, the screen lit up, flooding with notifications. CNN breaking news banners, FBI press releases, university expulsion notices. The evidence Daniel had released was spreading like wildfire. Videos of Adrian's assaults were already going viral. His name, once gilded in privilege, was being dragged through the mud in real time. Elena picked up the phone and held it inches from his face. His own reflection stared back at him, broken and terrified. She whispered, not with fear, but with certainty, that his empire was finished, that this moment was not just the end of his violence, but the beginning of his downfall. Rosa sobbed harder, not just from fear, but from pride. Her daughter wasn't just surviving. She was rewriting their story. The door burst open. Security guards stormed in, their radios crackling. They froze for a moment, stunned by the scene before them. The heir of one of Texas's most powerful families sprawled on the ground, bloodied and restrained by a young woman who looked more warrior than victim. Their hesitation was brief. Rosa shouted Elena's name, rushing inside, her arms wrapping tightly around her daughter. For the first time, Rosa didn't feel powerless. She felt safe because Elena had made them safe. The guards handcuffed Adrian, ignoring his protests, his shouts that his father would make them pay. But outside the tower, flashing cameras and news vans were already lining the street. The world had finally turned its gaze on Adrian Coleman, and it was not with admiration. It was with condemnation. As they dragged him past the glass walls, his eyes locked with Elena's one last time. What he saw there was not fear. It was strength, a gaze that pierced through his arrogance and burned into him the truth he had spent his life denying. Money couldn't erase accountability, and privilege couldn't bury justice forever. That look haunted him even as the elevator doors slammed shut. The air inside the lounge was thick with silence after he was gone. Rosa clutched Elena's hand, her body shaking, her tears falling freely. For years, she had scrubbed floors for men like Adrian, bowing her head, staying quiet, praying for safety. But now, her daughter had shown her that silence was no longer their only option. Outside, reporters shouted questions, cameras flashing, headlines already spinning the story as Operation Broken Crown. The fall of Adrian Coleman had begun, and it was unstoppable. But for Elena, this was not just the end of Adrian's reign. It was the beginning of her own. Because storms don't ask permission to arrive. They break, they roar, they change everything in their path. And Elena Alvarez, La Tormenta, had just begun to rise. The days that followed felt unreal for Rosa and Elena. One moment, they were shadows in the background of a skyscraper, invisible to the powerful. The next, their story was on every screen in America. Headlines blared about Adrian Coleman's fall from grace, the FBI raids, and the family empire crumbling under the weight of corruption. For years, he had been shielded by privilege. Now he was stripped bare for the world to see, not as an untouchable heir, but as a criminal. For Rosa, the transformation was just as profound. No longer bound to scrubbing floors under flickering fluorescent lights, she left behind decades of silent labor. With Elena's new career contract, Rosa opened her own cleaning company, one built on fair wages, dignity, and respect. She was no longer at the mercy of wealthy employers. She became her own boss, a woman who refused to let the cycle of exploitation continue. Elena, meanwhile, stepped into a spotlight she had once hidden from. 2 months later, She walked into the Toyota Center in Houston for her professional boxing debut. Under the roar of thousands, she entered the ring as La Tormenta, the storm. Her gloves were raised high, her heart pounding not with fear, but with fire. When the bell rang, she fought with precision, with purpose, with the weight of every woman who had ever been underestimated pressing behind her fists. She didn't just win. She dominated, securing a $10 million sponsorship and a future her mother had once only dreamed of. Yet Elena's victory was more than financial. It was symbolic. In interviews, she told the world she fought for those who had been silenced, for women who were told to stay quiet, for immigrants and workers dismissed as invisible. Her words resonated because they carried truth. Audiences weren't just cheering for a boxer. They were cheering for resilience, for justice, for the reminder that even in the face of privilege and cruelty, strength could emerge from the most unexpected places. Meanwhile, Adrian Coleman sat in a cold federal courtroom, stripped of designer suits and family protection. The mountain of evidence gathered against him was undeniable. Assault, corruption, possession, cover-ups. Witness after witness took the stand. Survivors of his violence finally spoke without fear. And when the verdict came, it was clear. Adrian would spend the next 15 years in federal prison. His empire was gone, his accounts frozen, his properties auctioned off to cover debts and fines. The once untouchable heir was reduced to nothing more than an inmate number. In his cell, Adrian replayed that night endlessly. Not the flashing cameras, not the courtroom, but the look in Elena's eyes as she whispered that she wasn't afraid. That moment haunted him because it was the first time in his life that his name, his wealth, and his arrogance couldn't protect him. It was the moment he realized the illusion of power could shatter in an instant. But this story isn't just about one spoiled heir's downfall. It's about something much larger, about the countless Roses and Elenas who face the quiet weight of injustice every day. For every headline that makes it to the news, there are thousands of stories that remain hidden, silenced by fear of retaliation, by poverty, by systemic inequality that protects the powerful while erasing the vulnerable. Racism and privilege don't always reveal themselves in violent outbursts. Sometimes they lurk in the everyday. A dismissive glance, a worker spoken to like they're less than human, an immigrant mother forced to endure humiliation because silence is the price of survival. Rosa lived in that silence for decades. And it took one spark, one act of arrogance, for the world to finally see it. Elena's rise is a reminder that underestimated strength can topple entire empires. But it is also a call to look closer, at the invisible workers cleaning our offices, at the women carrying 2 jobs to feed their families, at the countless stories never told. Because behind every quiet face, there may be a storm waiting to rise. The fall of Adrian Coleman was called Operation Broken Crown. But in truth, it was something greater. It was proof that crowns built on oppression eventually crumble. That power used to silence others is never permanent. And that courage, even in its smallest form, can echo far louder than wealth ever could. So the question is, how many more crowns must break before we recognize the humanity of those we overlook every day? Because the real storm isn't in the boxing ring. It's in the voices that refuse to stay silent any longer. What do you think about Adrian Coleman's downfall? Do you believe justice was truly served? Or was his prison sentence too light for the damage he caused? And what about Elena? Does her rise as La Tormenta inspire you the way it inspired thousands watching her first fight? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, make sure to hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this.